If you walk into a restaurant in America today, you'll probably pay more than just the price on the menu. By the time the bill arrives, you're expected to add another 20%, sometimes even 30% to your total bill. They call it tipping. In many parts of the world, leaving a tip is simply a way of saying thank you for excellent service. But in America, tipping has become something very different. It reflects an economic system that gradually shifted the responsibility of paying workers from employers to customers. But here's the surprising part. It didn't even start in America. In fact, Americans once hated tipping. So how did a practice that was once condemned as un-American become one of the defining features of American business? To answer that, we have to go back to where it all began. What exactly is tipping? A tip is an extra payment voluntarily given to someone who provides a service. The key word here is voluntarily. At least, that's what tipping was originally supposed to mean. It is money paid in addition to the price of a product or service.
For example, if a restaurant meal costs $50 and you leave an extra $10 for the server, your total payment becomes $60. That additional $10 is the tip. The important principle behind tipping is that it was never meant to purchase the service itself. It was simply a reward for exceptional service after the experience was over. Traditionally, tipping was associated with only a handful of professions, including restaurant servers, bartenders, taxi drivers, hotel staff, hairdressers, and delivery drivers. But today, that list has expanded far beyond those industries. What tipping is not. One of the biggest misconceptions is that tipping is simply another price. Historically, it was never intended to be. A tip is not a government tax. It is not a mandatory business fee, unless it's automatically added as a service charge. It is not the legal wage a customer is supposed to pay. It is not payment for the food or product itself. And it was never meant to replace fair wages. Yet, over time, that distinction has become increasingly blurred. Today, many Americans feel that tipping has shifted from being an optional reward into an expected and sometimes forced social obligation. So, where did tipping actually begin? Historians trace its origins back to medieval Europe. During the Middle Ages, wealthy families rewarded servants with small sums of money for exceptional service. These payments were entirely discretionary. Guests staying in large private homes often gave money to household servants before leaving. These gifts became known as vails. As time passed, coffee houses, taverns, and inns adopted similar customs. Over the centuries, the practice spread throughout Europe. Linguists generally believe the word tip evolved from British slang, meaning to give or to hand over. How did tipping arrive in America? During the 1800s, wealthy Americans traveled across Europe and returned home impressed by the customs of the European aristocracy. One of those customs was tipping, but ordinary Americans wanted nothing to do with it. The United States had emerged from revolutions against inherited privilege and rigid class systems. To many Americans, tipping represented exactly the kind of aristocratic behavior their country had rejected. Newspapers attacked the practice relentlessly. They described tipping as undemocratic, un-American, humiliating, and deeply classist. Critics argued that every worker deserved dignity and fair wages, not dependence on wealthy customers for extra money. So how did America go from rejecting tipping to embracing it? The answer lies in one of the darkest chapters of American history. The turning point happened after the Civil War. The Civil War had just ended. Slavery had been abolished. Millions of formerly enslaved Black Americans entered the workforce, searching for jobs and financial independence. Many found work as railroad porters, hotel attendants, restaurant servers, barbers, and domestic servants. But here's what happened next. Instead of paying these workers fair wages, many employers adopted the European tipping system, but with one crucial difference. Instead of employers paying workers, customers would. Businesses shifted the responsibility of paying wages directly onto the public through tips. For employers, it was the perfect business model. Labor costs dropped dramatically. Profits increased. And if business was slow, employees, not owners, absorbed much of the financial loss.
In many cases, workers received little or no wages at all. Their survival depended almost entirely on tips. This system disproportionately affected Black workers, making tipping closely connected to both racism and economic inequality in the United States.
Employers loved the tipping. They benefited the most. It reduced payroll expenses. It increased profits. It shifted labor costs onto customers. And they rewarded workers only when customers chose to leave a tip. It transferred much of the financial risk away from businesses and onto workers themselves. Did the workers like this system? Of course not. Naturally, this sparked outrage. As the practice spread, an anti-tipping movement emerged across America. Critics argued that tipping encouraged servility, created inequality, and allowed employers to exploit workers. Several states even passed laws banning tipping. Among them were Washington, South Carolina, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Iowa. But those laws didn't last. Businesses resisted them, customers ignored them, and courts found them extremely difficult to enforce. Eventually, nearly all of those anti-tipping laws were repealed. Then came another major turning point: the Great Depression and labor laws. During the Great Depression, the federal government introduced minimum wage protections, but there was one important exception: tipped workers. Under federal law, employers were allowed to pay tipped workers less than the standard minimum wage, as long as the workers earned enough tips to make up the difference. That legal framework still shapes the American labor market today. Although many states now require employers to pay the full state minimum wage before tips, federal law continues to allow lower direct wages for many tipped employees. So, if many Americans dislike tipping, why does the system continue? Why Americans still tip? There are several reasons. First, social pressure. Many people worry about appearing cheap. Servers often know whether customers tipped. Friends and family may quietly judge someone's tipping habits. Second, cultural norms. Children grow up watching adults tip. Over time, it simply becomes normal. Third, economic necessity. Millions of workers rely on tips to pay rent, buy groceries, and cover everyday expenses. And finally, industry standards. Many restaurants keep menu prices lower because they expect customers to make up part of workers' income through tips.
The rise of the 20% rule. The expected tip has also changed over time. For much of the 20th century, 10% was considered generous. Later, 15% became the standard. By the 1990s and early 2000s, 18% became increasingly common. Today, 20% is widely considered the benchmark for good service at many full-service restaurants across America. And recently, payment screens have started suggesting tips as high as 25 or even 30%. This has given rise to a phenomenon many critics call tip creep or tipflation.
What is tip creep? Tip creep refers to the growing expectation of tipping in places where customers traditionally never tip. Today, you might be asked to leave a tip at coffee shops, bakeries, food trucks, ice cream stands, retail stores, even self-checkout stores where you serve yourself. You will still be forced to pay a tip, and online purchases aren't left out. Sometimes customers are asked to tip before receiving any service at all. This transformed tipping from a reward into a psychological expectation. And perhaps one of the biggest consequences isn't financial. It's psychological. Here's a real example. A customer spent more than $600 at a restaurant and left a $60 tip. That's roughly a 10% tip, an amount that many people in other countries would still consider generous. But according to the customer, the restaurant staff reportedly wrote a note on the receipt expressing disappointment and suggesting that she should have tipped more because of the size of the bill. Think about that for a second. They weren't saying the customer refused to tip. They were upset because the tip didn't meet what they believed was the expected percentage. Whether you agree with the customer or the server isn't really the point. The point is how dramatically the culture has changed. What was once a voluntary gesture of appreciation has, in many situations, become an unwritten, forceful social obligation. And for many customers, failing to meet that expectation can lead to criticism, guilt, or public shaming.
The psychological cost of tipping. Many customers constantly wonder, did I tip enough? Did the service deserve more? Will people think I'm cheap? For many people, tipping creates anxiety, guilt, and social pressure. Tipping in America is not merely about leaving extra money after a meal. It is a reflection of the nation's evolving bad attitudes toward work, fairness,
race, class, and responsibility. Over generations, it transformed from an optional gesture of appreciation into a mandatory, entitled social norm, and in many sectors, an economic necessity. A message to business owners: if you cannot pay your workers well, do not open a business. It's not your customer's job to pay your staff. And to workers, respectfully, if your wage is too low for you, don't do the job. You cross the line when you take on a $2 per hour job and expect customers to pay your bills. The whole point of tipping is optional and should be done out of free will. If tipping is expected or forced, is it still a tip?